Hi, Sophia. You're going to notice kind of a weird setup behind me, and that is where I had to hang my robe over the window because the light streams in and makes it way too bright and kind of like blurs everything out. So don't mind that. That's not actually how I normally live. That's just how I solved a problem. We are going to be in Exodus today. So that is the second book of the Bible. It's going to be towards the front of your Bible. When we were reading in Luke for Advent and then again yesterday, that's the New Testament. And the New Testament is the story of Jesus and the church, which started after Jesus was resurrected. The Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible, is the first half of the Bible, and it's actually a little bit more than half. It's the first half of the Bible, and it's the story of the Jewish people's experience with God. So you can kind of think of it as getting to know God a little bit at a time. The same way that when you get to know a friend, you know them a little bit at a time. Like first when you're kind of meeting a new friend and you're finding out things about them, like what they like and what they don't like and what their family is like and games they like to play and things like that. And then as you go on, like your mom and I now have been friends for like more than 20 years, like 25 years almost. We know a lot about each other. We know each other's parents, we've been to each other's houses, we've traveled together, we've had really happy things and really sad things in our lives that we've gone through together because we've been friends for so long. So I feel like your mom knows me really well and I know her really well, and we can kind of guess how the other person is going to react because we know each other so well. But in the beginning of our friendship, it wasn't like that. In the beginning, we were just getting to know each other, and we were like, what kind of music do you like to listen to? You know, what do you think about this class? Because we were in college together. Do you want to get nachos down at the Hoop? Because that was like the little cafe, and your mom and I would be working in the same office late at night because I was on the newspaper and she was on college government, and they were in the same building. So a lot of times we would be some of the only people in the building late at night, and we would go down and get nachos. So we're kind of getting to know God in the same way through the whole arc of the Bible, is that like we're first meeting him, we're finding out what God is like, and through his relationship with the Jewish people, they're finding out things with him, and then when Jesus comes, he says, hey, this is what, all of the things that you kind of saw glimmers of, that you had an idea about God of, some of those are really, really right, and some of those you kind of misinterpreted, that you didn't understand that very well. But mostly, I'm here to say that who you thought God was in the Old Testament is exactly who he is, and I'm the embodiment of that. So if you're ever not sure how to understand God, think of him in terms of Jesus. What would Jesus do? What did Jesus do? What did he say about this? That's a pretty good way to judge how God feels about that, because Jesus is God. So we are in Exodus, the second book of the Bible, and we're going to start at a place where the Israelites do not yet, they've been in their own land, but now they have, a lot of them are in Egypt. And they had gone to Egypt at first because there was a famine. So there had been no food, and Egypt was one of the only places that had food. So a bunch of them had moved to Egypt, kind of like refugees do, like migrants do when things are very tumultuous in their own country, and they need to move someplace to make a better life, right? A lot of people come to the U.S. for that reason. So a lot of Jewish people had gone to Egypt, and then as their numbers grew, as they settled and they had families and they had kids, the Egyptians started to get nervous and were like, there's kind of too many of them. And they actually put them into slavery. And the Jewish people became the slaves of the Egyptian people, and that's where we're going to start that story. Then a new king who did not know about Joseph. Joseph was he was a Jewish person who had been like the vice king, like a vice president. Really, really important to the king. And because of him, Jewish people had been treated really well for a while. But Joseph died, and after a couple of generations, nobody remembered him. So then a new king who did not know about Joseph came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people. I forgot to say, we're in the first chapter, and we're on verse 8. So Exodus 1, verse 8. Look, he said to his people, The Israelites have become much too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, they will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. And they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with hard labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their hard labor, the Egyptians used them ruthlessly. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, "When you help the Hebrew women in childbirth and observe them on the delivery stool, if it's a boy, kill him, but if it's a girl, let her live." The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, "Why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live?" The midwives answered Pharaoh, "Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive." So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people: "Every boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live." Did you notice what is driving the behavior of the king? They call the king the Pharaoh. What is driving his behavior? And I think our clue is in verse 10, where he says, we must deal shrewdly with them. Like, we have to be smart about this. Or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, they will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. He's afraid. He's scared. The Jewish people they called them the Israelites at the time, because they're the descendants of Israel. He's afraid that they're going to get too powerful, and that they're going to rise up and want to fight against Egypt, and that when he says that they'll leave, he's afraid that they're going to take a lot of wealth with them, that they'll take the animals and the property that they've earned there. And so he enslaves them. And we saw that a word a couple of times where it says that they were treated ruthlessly. Ruthlessly means with no mercy, with no pity, with no concern for them as people. He didn't think of them as people. We know stories of slavery, right? You're very familiar about the story of slavery in America. This is not exactly like that, but we see some of the same things, the way that slaves are treated, that this was the idea that every generation that was born, if you were Jewish, you were born into slavery. And it goes on for a couple of hundred years. It doesn't tell us that, but we know from other places in the Bible that the Hebrews are enslaved for about 400 years. It's a long time. I feel like they would probably give up hope, right? They would think, like, I guess this is just our lives. And you can see how the Pharaoh is really afraid that they're going to rise up, because he says if when the baby boys are born, kill them. Because the boys are the ones who would be soldiers, right? So he's saying, you can let the girls live, but if a boy is born, kill him. And the midwives who deliver the babies, they don't want to do that. So they lie to him. When he says, why are you letting them live? And they say, oh, it's just that they have the babies so fast that it's before we can even get there. When really what they're doing is they're saving the babies. They're making sure that the babies don't die. So it says that God sees that. So what's interesting here is that even though this feels really sad and really unfair and really hopeless, God is watching this. He's seeing the way his people are being treated. He's seeing the way the Egyptians are treating the Israelites. And he's noticing just little kindnesses. He's noticing that the midwives they disobey the government. They disobey the king to do what they think is right. And it says God blesses them because of that. He sees what they do and he honors that. So I think it must have been really scary for the Israelites. That it would have been scary and bad to be a slave to begin with, and then to have this realization that they're trying to kill your children, And then when that doesn't work, when they can't get the midwives to just kill the children as soon as they're born, he says, take the boys and just throw them into the river. He wants to drown them all. And that's going to be kind of where we pick up tomorrow. But I think what we see is that the Israelites, the great thing that they do here is that they just endure. They just survive. It doesn't tell us anything about if they're praying or if they're calling out. I think what just matters here is that God sees when we're being hurt, and he sees when we're hurting other people. You know how we talked about yesterday the idea that Lent is a lot of, that leading up to Jesus's death and crucifixion is a lot about, like, why did Jesus have to die? And the reason that Jesus dies, and he chooses to die, he agrees to die, he does it willingly, nobody makes him, is that it's the only way to free us from sin. Jesus looks at us and he says, you're like captives. You're like hostages that have been taken by evil and death, and you're being held, and it's making your lives so awful, and that's not what I ever wanted for you. And so I'm going to go on this rescue mission where I'm going to make a bargain, basically. I'm going to tell death I get to buy back all of these people. I get to ransom them. Remember, a ransom, you know, from like probably TV and stuff, a ransom is if someone is kidnapped and the kidnappers say you can have them back if you pay us like $10,000. So we use that word a lot. You'll hear that word a lot, that Jesus ransoms us. He buys us back from death and from evil so that we can live these full lives. And we're kind of seeing a similar idea here. We haven't seen it yet. Right now we're just seeing what it feels like for the Israelites to be trapped in this terrible situation and to feel like there's no future. And that, because your future is really, children are a symbol of our future, right? We always talk about children are the future. Children are a symbol of the good things that we can look forward to, that the world is worth saving if children are still being born. And so to have that taken away, to know that your children are being killed is a very worst thing that can happen to people, I think. And so that's what the Israelites are up against. And so we'll start with that again tomorrow. But I think we also want to remember that even though it probably feels so hopeless to the Israelites, like they'll never escape, and they, you know, after a century or something, like there's no one that they would know who had ever not been a slave. And they can't see any future when they won't be slaves. But God has not forgotten them. And he's watching so closely that he even knows what the midwives do in the privacy of the birthing room when there's no one there but the mother and the midwife. He sees that. Those little secret things that we do that we think no one sees, whether they're good or whether they're bad. God sees them all, and he loves us so deeply that nothing good that we do, even if we feel like we should get credit for it, we should be acknowledged, and it doesn't get acknowledged, God always sees it and he honors it. And the bad things that we do that we think we're hiding, God sees those too, and he loves us enough that he wants to set us free from those bad things.